Well, welcome. We are delighted that you have joined us this evening for this seminar about security for houses of worship. My name is Betsy Rumer, and I'm the executive pastor of ministry here at Memorial Park Church, and we are delighted that you have joined us. For tonight's seminar, we don't want to be people who are reactionary, and we don't want to be people who are fearful, but we do want to be people who are wise. We want to be people who can help others to be non-anxious when they come to worship. We want to ourselves be non-anxious presence for them. And so tonight, we're going to offer you some wisdom and some information. We're going to give you an opportunity to ask some questions. Because what we really want is for our sanctuaries to be just that, sanctuaries. So if you would, we're just going to pray as we open things up. Heavenly Father, thank you that your Spirit is with us. And we know, Lord, that in all things that we are not alone. And even as we enter into a topic that can be fraught with anxiety and with fear, that we have no fear in you. And so, Lord, thank you for your presence this evening. Thank you for Forrest, and thank you for Andrew, and for the experience and the wealth of information that they come with tonight. May we be grateful, and may we give all glory to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Now I'm just going to introduce both of our speakers this evening, and then Forrest is going to start for us. So tonight we have Forrest Norman, who is from Dickey, McCamey, and Chilcote, where he is their chair of the Church Law Practice Group. Try saying that 3 times fast. The chair of the Church Law Practice Group. Forrest is a frequent lecturer on church security and on legal risk management for churches. And he's also a very dear friend of Memorial Park Church. He is a member of Hudson EPC Church, and we just welcome him this evening, and we're grateful for his expertise. His partner tonight is Andrew Blubaugh, who is the director of Apex Shooting and Tactics. And Andrew has over 20 years of experience that ranges from military to security contractor to being a police officer. He provides training that is specific to active killer responses, and he does that with schools, with churches, and with businesses, and he's been doing that for over 15 years. So instead of taking up any more of your time, I'm going to ask if Forrest would come up and if you would give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for coming tonight. It is a blessing to be here at Memorial Park, and it is a blessing to be in this community where just getting the word out, we get all these churches and representatives. Thank you for taking your time tonight to come and participate in our seminar here. I'm going to try and be very respectful of your time. It's a Wednesday night, and you have families to get to, and we have an awful lot of information to cover. The PowerPoint, I will be skimming through it at high speed. The material that you received as a handout is not the same as the PowerPoint. If later you do want the PowerPoint, just email me. My email is in the handout there. I'm happy to do that, and I will be speaking here tonight for about 45 minutes. I will turn it over then to Andrew to give his portion of the presentation and the orientation. Then we'll take questions. I will stay as long as it takes tonight, as long as people have questions and want to talk, or until Betsy throws me out, whichever comes first. But again, I want to thank everybody for being here and understanding the importance of what we are doing. The main point that we're going to be talking about today is balancing the need to be secure in worship with maintaining our worship ministry. We all know that from the beginning, we have a conception that our churches are to be a sanctuary, a place of peace where we come to worship God, where we come to be able to encounter God in peace. We bring our troubles, our cares, and our concerns. And I was pushing him. He has the special touch. So we have this image, especially people that are churchgoers. We have this image of our church as being an idyllic and secure place that is a sanctuary. But we have to know the times today. Today, churches are no longer immune from violence. Actually, if you really study it carefully, churches have not traditionally been secure from violence and attacks. I was recently in Europe and touring around, and I had the privilege of worshiping with a church, a Waldensian church. And if you know anything about their history was they were Reformed before the Reformation, but they were brutally attacked often. Sectarian violence is nothing new in the world. We have, in America, enjoyed 2 centuries plus of absolute respect for worship. We are seeing signs that is eroding. Now, I do not want to be an alarmist. I don't want to scare people because the church is still a sanctuary. Churches are still amazingly safe places to be on a Sunday morning or on a Wednesday evening or on a Thursday or Friday, Saturday, whenever. They are still, when you think about it, Pennsylvania, I believe, has close to 10,000 churches in it. Every Sunday or Saturday, churches gather for worship, and for the most part, without any incident. But because we view our churches as such sacred places, because we are most vulnerable when we are coming to church to approach God, we're bearing our souls and we're opening up our hearts. When we encounter violence in a church, it is incredibly disconcerting. So we need, as church leaders, to balance the sanctuary aspect, the openness of our church. We want people to wander in. Most of us, sadly, do evangelism and outreach by opening our doors and hoping somebody walks in on a Sunday morning. So we don't want to have our doors locked. It probably is not a good outreach if you have a visitor go through a TSA-style screening. That's not a way to welcome them into your house of worship. So we have to know the times today because secular humanism is now the law of the land. We have to acknowledge that Christianity is no longer the faith of the realm. I first heard that in the 90s, and I was stunned. I was affronted. But I had to be realistic about it. As Betsy said, we have to be wise. We have to be wise and know and understand the times. A point that really hit me, I've been practicing law for 26 years, and I've been representing churches and religious institutions for most of that time. When I started doing it, the mere fact that I was representing churches gave us a leg up. We were respected. We were the good guys. About 10, 12 years ago, I noticed that perception in society began to erode. And that's scary. That is scary. Well, we could hunker down in the bunker. We could secure our churches, and we could adopt a mentality of just protect those in worship. But that would absolutely impinge upon the ministries and the outreach that we all have in common. We've got a lot of different denominations represented here today. We all want to reach other people. We all want to be available to bring people closer to God. So a lot of what we are doing is acknowledging in our safety ministry, is acknowledging that there are risks. And how do we go about maintaining our ministry and maintaining the security? Because churches are no longer seen as off limits for violence. Acts of violence are nothing new. Since time immemorial, since Cain hit Abel with the leg of the table, we have seen violence, humanity's inhumanity towards man. Recently, we have been absolutely stunned and shocked by some of the mass shootings. Emmanuel African Methodist Church in Charleston, South Carolina, the perpetrator, he went in and prayed with the people before he shot them up. Think about that. One of the points I really want to disabuse you of is the fact that your good ministry alone will not protect you. It will not protect you. Another point I really would like to emphasize is you are not being unfaithful to God by taking steps to protect the flock. A lot of people will be reticent to take security measures because they would rather rely upon God's divine protection. God's divine protection is absolute. It is. But adding a layer of security for your physical building is not a sign of infidelity towards God. 26 people shot up. The violence in Sutherland, Texas, horrific. The perpetrator had no connection to that church other than he thought that his ex-wife was worshiping there. It was random. He went in and shot people up. She was not there. Do you chalk that up as terrorism, anti-church hatred, or do you chalk it up as some other type of domestic violence just gone wild? The recent one in Pittsburgh really hit home. We have friends in this community that go there. People should be safe and secure in worship. Church shootings are nothing new. At the back of the handout that I've given you, you'll see, don't turn there now, you can look at it later, but there are tons of church shootings. Most of them are one or two people. Most, it's an in and out type thing. It is random, it is unpredictable, and it is very difficult to prevent as an absolute matter of security. So we want to be, our goal of course is to be secure in worship. I love this particular picture. This is actually my church up there, my home church, and Andrew pointed out to us, everybody is sitting there with their backs to the door. We're vulnerable. We're not paying attention. We are sitting targets in the event of an active shooter situation. So the overriding theme here today, I want you to think of what we are doing as security ministry. You're in church, your primary objective is, in fact, ministry. So if you think about security ministry as an aspect of protecting the flock, you will be able to give it its due emphasis. It's not a sideshow, it is just one of the many elements. I see security ministry as the overlapping of three different disciplines. You've got physical security, you have the legal aspect of it because there are legal considerations, and as a lawyer, I am always willing to talk to you at length about the law. And then you have the ministry aspect. Ideally, you want the ministry to overlap and sort of drive everything.
So, Forrest, why the heck doesn't ministry cover over all of that?
Because I'm a lawyer. Actually, when you look at this, there are aspects that things can be legal but not part of your ministry. So I just wanted the Venn diagram to emphasize that too. We want the ministry to be predominant. So when you go through the aspect of security ministry that you're doing, emphasize the ministry, because if you do that, your people will feel more secure in worship. Acknowledge the issues. Here are the 4 principles that I really like to emphasize. Acknowledge the issues, be realistic, don't lose sight of your ministry, and for goodness sake, make a plan. I really believe we need to keep these items very simple because it is easy to get lost in the details. Now, I am Presbyterian, so I can pick on Presbyterians, but I would also like to pick on Methodists, because Presbyterians and Methodists are capable of drafting up documents that are absolutely beautiful. They will go through 14 committee meetings, 16 revisions, and they will be absolutely phenomenal before they're even implemented. Implement your plan as soon as possible. In fact, implement steps, and I'll go over this a few more times. Implement safety measures before you even have a written document. Make sure you're doing something. So one of the aspects that I want people to be aware of is just to think about what we're doing. Think about what type of risks the church is exposed to. Now, we started with the shootings. Shootings are absolutely evil, horrific, deadly, and they're deadly to your ministry, but they are the least likely of violent criminal acts that you are probably going to encounter. You're going to encounter an entire range. Vandalism, someone comes spray paint on the side of your church. Guess what? That is going to have a deterrent effect and a chilling effect on your flock. Physical assault inside the church. Yeah, I was made particularly aware of it when I got a panic call from our organist one night, and she said, Forrest, I left the door open behind me, and somebody came in, and they're listening to me warm up, just practicing on a random night. It was just somebody from the street came in, scared the daylights out of her. Turned out to be harmless. But we have to be aware that any opening like that can prevent an opportunity for some type of an assault. Inside the church, outside the church, your parking lots are big and dark. Well, half the day they're dark. 3/4 of the day in Pittsburgh for half the year. When you are traveling, you ever send your youth group somewhere? That should send chills down your spine when you think about what they're doing, where they're going, and their lack of experience. That is part of the security ministry that you need to provide for. So think about risks. Do risk identification. Sexual assault and sexual misconduct. It is deadly to a church. Protests. With the changing views of churches today and the view of church and society, we are going to see more protests, protesters, and obstructionists. A story that I just saw in the paper that occurred in a church. Well, actually, I'm going to get to that one in a minute because it's a different example. But protesters who might not like the stand you're taking on a particular theological issue, they might want to obstruct. We are seeing a lack of civility in society, friends, that is going to come into our churches. So how do you respond? You need to be aware of the risk before you can come up with a plan for doing it. When you think about your usher team, most of us just take volunteers to fill any role. Volunteer usher team, they are not trained in how to deal with an obstructor. Little tips. Then we've got them in the handout today and on the materials here. But for example, if somebody comes in and obstructs your worship, your usher might be inclined to take them by the arm and lead them out. Don't do it. Don't touch them. Touch can be a trigger. If somebody is unstable, knowing that if you touch them, that might be the thing that completely sets them off. If you have not thought of that in advance, if you haven't addressed the issues beforehand, you're going to have to come up with the right answer on the spot. And let me tell you, most of us can't come up with the right answer on the spot. And as the obstruction increases, the response time and the stress and the tension that you will feel will absolutely diminish. Your ability to perceive and respond to a risk, if you are not expecting it, puts you at a major, major disadvantage. You've got hate crimes, crimes of passion. Sutherland Park was a domestic dispute. Domestic disputes are horrific risks for churches. Do you have procedures in place to identify, respond, and head off a potential domestic dispute finding its way into your sanctuary? Terrorism. I don't know, this is always clicking ahead twice, but that's okay. I'm too strong. My trigger finger is happy. Know what type of perpetrators. Just spend a little bit of time on that. You've got your unknown perpetrator, somebody that walks in at random intent on doing harm. A known perpetrator, somebody's a little volatile. This could be the domestic dispute that is coming around. You say, okay, little Fred is edgy these days. We want to keep a close eye on him. Employees, former employees, the disgruntled ex-employee, child custody issues. Do you have a procedure in place as to who can check the kids out of your nurseries? Do you even have a check-in, check-out procedure at your nursery? Are you big enough to require it, or are you small enough where everybody knows everybody anyways? All of these are going to have to be addressed by you on your church-by-church basis. One size does not fit all. And by the way, if you design an incredibly complex, detailed protocol and print it out, and it's 26 pages with subparts and all that, but you only have 80 people in worship, you might not have enough people to staff your plan. As a lawyer, I will tell you that's going to be a problem because you've already just come up with a document that says this is what we should do, and if something goes wrong and you haven't followed it, you have just exposed yourself to liability. Now, let me tell you something else, an overriding theme. Don't let fear of liability drive this boat. Let your concern for the safety of the flock drive the boat. When you have questions about liability, talk to a lawyer. Give us a call. We'll walk you through that type of stuff. So everyone's at risk, everyone that comes into your church. Be realistic. Don't decide that you're going to do a little target hardening and put a moat around your church. That is not realistic or commensurate with the threat. So basic first steps. I kind of want to get into some of the actual detailed. By the way, just a quick show of hands. How many people here have churches that have safety and security teams in place? Okay. Every presenter always says, about half. So if you don't, here are some basic steps that you need to start implementing. 1, form a team. 2, implement the easy steps. I love this part of it, guys. Just do something easy. Implement the easy steps and do it this week. Very simple things that can be done. We'll get to a few of those in a minute. Consult and confer. If you don't know what you're doing, ask. There are plenty of people. There are people like Andrew that has a company that does this for a living. There are people that are in the broader industry. Give me a call. Say, how do we set this team up? What do we need to do? How do we need to review it? Consult and confer. But don't wait to start taking safety measures until after you've consulted and conferred. Do that whenever it becomes logical. Does that make sense? I really want to emphasize the doing part of this. Put something in place. Train key people. Figure out who on your church team needs to be trained. Now, a lot of people want to have the pastor, the lead pastor, as part of it. Please don't add that burden to the lead pastor. They've got enough, and frankly, the skill set that takes somebody into ministry is not necessarily the same skill set that takes them into security ministry or security. And if you want to keep your church's focus on ministry, let your pastor be the pastor and find some people on the team and say they will run the security aspects. So find someone. A big tip I've got, just appoint somebody. Appoint somebody quickly. Presbyterians, form a committee. Do that in due course, but first grab somebody. Say, Roger, I'd like you to head up security at our church this week. Can you do that? And just be at the task force. And then in a month, Roger will come back and say, I can't do this on my own. I need a committee. Well, okay, we're Presbyterians. We'll give you a committee. But in the meantime, he has taken certain steps. Then here is another critical point. Review and update. Constantly look at your security plan. Have somebody reviewing it and saying, what are we doing? Does this work? Does it make sense? Are we actually following it? I know one church that just recently put in a beautiful, high-tech door system. And the doors are even, you've got a computerized access panel, and the staff can type in, well, we have an AA meeting at the church on Thursdays, so from this time to that time, the doors will be unlocked on this wing. Well, I went by to check the church out, and you know what they do? They put bricks by the door to prop it open. Okay, we're churches, we find ways to just kind of do this. That is a security breach. Yeah, it makes it easier, but so don't over-engineer your problem, but also don't under-engineer it, so review and update. So that church, their security team reported back to their session, the high-tech doors are not functioning well. When you're forming your team, recruit like-minded people. You have people in your congregations that are, in fact, interested in security. You want to get guys more involved in church activities? Offer a young man an opportunity to be on the security team. In my church, we decided to call it Usher Team 6. So, guys are willing to do that. Reach out to them. Get somebody that has some interest or experience. Now, I want to emphasize a couple things. First, almost every church has somebody within their church that has some law enforcement experience or is a law enforcement officer. Please don't overburden your local policemen. You know, they got to worship too. And it's really hard for people in law enforcement to actually get time off. They're always vigilant. So if you're asking them to be also the church security, be mindful that you are burdening them and asking them to be on the job at that particular time. Be mindful of it. So put them on the committee, but don't tell them, you're not our Sunday guy. Trust me, they're going to be aware of it. They're going to jump into action if something happens at your particular church, but don't overburden people. Be mindful, because what is this? It's security ministry. Remember that aspect of it. Don't get bogged down in the process. Keep your team small and adept, because you don't want to have people debating motions and counter motions, an amendment to the motion. Just do it. Just do it, and then make sure you have church leadership support as well. This is part of the low-hanging fruit. That's the slide there. Just grab the easy stuff. Tell your ushers to start greeting people. If you have a parking lot big enough that merits it, have somebody outside the doors and greet people in the parking lot. That is so wonderful and simple, because just saying hello to people, and especially a visitor, you have an immediate identification. Is this person acting strange? Is there some reason to be alarmed? But guess what? We're churches. We want people that are bothered to come and seek us out. I want someone who is all of a sudden experiencing an emotional hardship to come to my church, show up when they need it. And 999 times, if not more, out of 1,000, they're just going to be a normal person that's having a rough week that needs to come into church. Welcome them. If they are a bad guy, a bad actor, and they see that there are greeters out there willing to welcome them in, if they're just looking for an easy target, they might move on. Heard a very, very chilling talk. A pastor I spoke to that was down in Texas after the Sutherland Springs massacre. They checked their church security cameras. The perpetrator's vehicle drove by their church, slowed down, and went on. That will give you a rush of emotions that you can't even process on the moment. But if you have upfront security, presence, something outside, that will help deflect the opportunist perpetrator. Consult and confer, identify, decide if you want to hire an outside security team or if you want to build your own team, or what kind of balance you want to do with that. Again, these are considerations that are going to be very specific to your church. Do you want to have armed security? Do you want to have uniformed security? Do you want them to be visibly armed, or do you want it to be concealed under a portion of their uniforms? All of these are considerations that you have to work through and decide what fits with what our church needs, because this is security ministry. Hire a consultant. You're going to find out things, and you're going to hear some of this in a few minutes when Andrew gets up, things that you never thought about. It is amazing. When you walk the property with a security consultant, they will tell you things that you did not think of. I don't care how good you are at this, how smart you are, you're not going to come up with it on your own. And wise people seek counsel. That's biblical. Seek counsel. Discuss it with people that are in the know. Train the people. Again, that's going to be more later. Review, revise, and update. Go back and look at it. It's not a one and done. It's not something that you can just do once and be over with. I'm going to move through some of these quickly because there's a few points I really do want to get to. Here's another thing. Survey the issues in the community. Your security team should be doing that. Your session, your council, your board of elders should not be the ones primarily worrying about the security, but you should have people on your security team saying, what's going on? Is there a crime wave in our neighborhood? Are there vandals? What's going on in our community? I was speaking with a security director at a synagogue in the Cleveland area. They have a hotline to the FBI that the FBI calls them when they hear of potential threats. So be aware of what that is. Now, by the way, if we all start calling the FBI with like a hotline, you're not going to get it. But again, evaluate your particular situation. Children's ministries. Every single person here knows the importance intuitively of securing children's ministries. And this goes all the way from physically being able to keep count of kids so you don't lose them, keeping bad guys and perpetrators and unknown people away from the children, but it can also include things like, where do you put pictures of your kids? Are you posting them online? How much information are you sharing? You have mandatory reporting laws. I hope everyone here is aware of the mandatory reporting laws in the state of Pennsylvania. That would be another full hour session that I'd love to be able to give you sometime. But you have specific child abuse reporting requirements by law that if you fail to do them, you are exposing yourself to civil and criminal liability. Know the parameters of that. Do your basic security assessments. Figure out what your doors are like, what your sanctuary are, where your exits are. Lighting around the doors. Bushes, how close are the bushes to the doors? Because when you're coming in, when the organist is coming into practice on a Thursday, if he or she is sitting there fumbling with the keys, she's vulnerable, focused on something else. Could somebody be hiding in the bushes around there? So take a look, and again, here is where having the expert walk your property with you is tremendous. You can do it on your own at a basic level. You'd be surprised at how much you learn in a hurry. Cameras. By the way, cameras are wonderful vehicles, but guess what they don't do? They don't stop crime. Cameras are after-the-fact investigative materials. But having a visible camera on the premises is a deterrent for the opportunist. We decided at our church to put up a sign, surveillance on premises. Because if somebody is looking for an easy target, I want them to think that ours is not. These are very simple things that you can do that will help prevent that. So panic buttons, keys, key cards, all this data control. Do you have a checkout procedure when a person leaves your staff? And by the way, exit interviews, incredibly valuable. Talk to people. Find out a little bit about them on their way out. Even if they're a real bad egg that you had to get out of the church in a hurry. Try and do it graciously to find out a little bit about them. So, and you can very politely say, have you turned in your computer? Do you make sure you don't have any personal data left on any of your files? So on and so forth. Go through a detailed exit interview. Make sure you get your key cards back. If you want to, change the access codes. However you do it, have some aspect of that. Here's a fun one in a panic situation. I'm going to really let Andrew cover more of this, but I have a bunch of C's. I let it off. Communicate, cover and concealment, control and chaos, CCW, concealed carry weapons. Countermeasures, call for help, the clock. He's going to talk to you about that. Codes, don't use them. Don't have little security codes. Pastor Blue, report to the sanctuary. No. In an emergency situation, you don't want people to have to think through codes. You want simple, trained, reactive responses. Do you have medical measures? Damage mitigation. Do you have, a lot of churches have defibrillators. Do you have a first aid kit? All of these are steps to think about and work through. There are so many simple things that you can do. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, believe it or not, on the legal tonight because I only have a little bit of time. The legal elements of this you need to understand. Your church leadership should understand what the duty is. The church is a legal entity. Church leaders can actually be exposed to liability. You should know what those parameters are. Most church leaders are going to be immune. Nonprofits, directors of corporations are statutorily immune from liability in Pennsylvania, except under certain circumstances. Willful negligence, intentional harm to the body, so on and so forth. But figure out where those are. Know what your legal rights and responsibilities as a church are, who you owe the duty to. Generally speaking, you have a duty to keep your premises reasonably safe for the services that you are offering. It's not just physical, as far as keeping it free from trip and fall, but also you could be exposed to liability from for an assault if you did not take some appropriate measure. Anytime you want, we can talk about that in more detail. Foreseeable risks, analyze it. Figure out what's foreseeable and take simple measures to prevent against it, and you are fulfilling part of your fiduciary duty as a leader of the church. It's a legal requirement, fulfill it, but more importantly, do it for the right reasons, for security, ministry. Churches are, in fact, soft targets for all the reasons we talked about from the beginning. You don't expect them to be a place of violence. You don't expect them to be a place where you encounter harm. You want to be open. That makes you exposed. So, concealed carry, I'm trying to get this one at a time again. Concealed carry policies. Now, first off, I love this slide because he's not concealing. That's pretty much open carry right there, but if I just had a picture of a guy's hip, you'd say, why are you doing that, Forrest? Concealed carry considerations should be made by you as an individual church. Every state has different laws regarding them. Here on this map here, we've got most states, churches are treated just as private property, meaning that there is no specific prohibition against carrying on a church. 6 or 7 states have a default presumption that if you have a license to carry a weapon, you are not allowed to carry on the church unless you are specifically authorized to do so by the particular house of worship. So in Ohio, for example, is a state where the presumption is you cannot carry into the church, but if the church passes a policy that you are allowed to, then it's legal. 2 states, Louisiana and actually Nebraska just changed it. You're not allowed under any circumstance to carry a weapon into a house of worship. So know your laws. Now the concealed carry laws, it's not a cure-all. It's not everything. The limitations on the carrier it's an individual right. If you have a CCW, that is an individual right to carry a weapon. It does not make you a parapoliceman. It does not make you a quasi-cop. It does not give you a license to shoot. It gives you a license to carry a weapon. And you can use that weapon, which is called deadly force, in certain circumstances. Not all circumstances. So you don't have any special grant of authority to be able to pull out your weapon. In fact, brandishing a weapon can be a crime if you pull it in the wrong situation. Please, if you are a church that is considering adopting a CCW policy, understand the legal implications. Understand the law. Give me a call. I'll be happy to come by, meet with you, and talk to you about what the parameters are. I should have put this slide up. I, of course, have it on my screen, my personal screen here. You can't really see it, but the Pennsylvania statute on when you can use defensive force, it's a tough read. I'm going to try and read some of this to you real quickly, just because I want you to understand the complexities of it. One subsection, the use of deadly force is not justified under this section unless the actor believes that such force is necessary to protect himself against death, serious bodily injury, kidnapping, or sexual intercourse compelled by force or threat. Nor is it justified, did you notice the double negative now? Nor is it justified if the actor with intent of causing death or serious bodily injury provoked the use of force against him in the encounter, or if the actor knows that he can avoid the necessity of using such force with complete safety by retreating, except if the actor is not obligated to retreat from the dwelling or place of work unless he... It goes on and on. There's like 5 more paragraphs just on these exceptions and following the negatives, double negatives, and the defaults. And if all of a sudden a bad actor comes into your church, you're not going to say, does this fit section 505B2, 3, or 4? Darn it, I wish I'd studied that more. You're not going to know that off the top of your head. Train and know the rules in advance. If you as a church are adopting a CCW policy, understand that you are not creating an armed security force. If you want to take on the responsibility of creating an armed security force, you better do it properly. My general advice off the cuff is don't create your own armed security force. Consult and confer with experts or hire someone that's doing it as an appropriate, licensed manner. There are just too many pitfalls, because if you decide we're going to let these 5 people conceal carry, but not these people, now you're making an artificial distinction that's not allowable at law. If you are telling the people how and when to use force, you are now taking on a responsibility that you did not have as a church. And what happens if if nobody ever uses a gun, it doesn't matter what your policy is. But the policies are there in case something goes wrong. What if your concealed carry security team has an accidental discharge? What if they make an improper decision? What if they're not aware of what was behind their target and somebody is injured? What if they're just a bad shot? All sorts of situations. What if they weren't really faced with deadly threat, deadly force under the law? If somebody breaks in right now with an AK-47, we can reasonably presume that that is deadly force. If somebody breaks in here and all of a sudden is swinging a lead pipe, does that constitute deadly force? What if it's nunchucks? What if they got brass knuckles? You can sort of scale back and see, what is the situation going to call for? You want your people to be very well and highly trained and understand what the law is. So I would caution you against adopting a policy that is too rigorous too soon. Draft one up, give a call to council and say, is this right? Does this pass muster? And guys like me are trained at telling you, these are the pitfalls in it. These are the risks. This is what you're taking on. This is an obligation that you need to be aware of and the risk that you need to be aware of at this point. Understand that concealed carry is an individual right. And you're not really going to be asking your ushers to take a bullet for somebody else. If they decide that they want to protect their family and run, they can. The concealed carry classes I've taken have said, get away from the risk if you can. Get away, protect yourself, preserve yourself. By the way, Andrew, if I'm running into your time, just stand up. I'm getting there. Okay. And here's another point, too, with your security teams. I forgot to mention this earlier. You don't need to have a Rambo on your security team. You can have a slightly paunchy, middle-aged guy. You can have a gal on your team. In fact, by the way, I encourage you to have women on your security team because women have different security awarenesses than men. Please, consult with them. They see a different type of risk. They face a different type of risk, and they will give valuable input. So get a blended team, put it together, and build on it. 21 of the last 22 mass shootings have been in places that are gun-free zones. Just kind of keep that in mind. By the way, and you'll see it in my printed material, I'm not going to tell anyone here how you should run your church. Please, if you do not want to have armaments on your church campus, then don't. That's entirely up to you. That's part of your free exercise of religion, and by all means, uphold those standards. See what else you can do. If you say we're not going to allow guns on our church campus, then don't. That's fine. But maybe you better have some cameras. Maybe there are other steps that you can do to help preserve and protect the peace for the flock. So just make the decision and make it logically and work your way through it. So when you adopt these concealed carry policies, consult. When you adopt a security policy in general, consult. Because there's so much more that the experts know that you're not going to be able to figure out intuitively. With that, I'm going to ask Andrew, come on up and give him some of the more nitty-gritty stuff.
So my name is Andrew Blubaugh. I own Apex Shooting and Tactics. We're stationed out of Akron, Ohio, but we provide training all over the country. There's a handful of pamphlets back there on the table that you guys signed in on if you're interested in some of the stuff that I do. What I'm going to be talking about is primarily what we do for churches, businesses, and schools, which is our Sheepdog Initiative. How I got started into this was when I was 19 years old, I dropped out of college and joined the Marine Corps. And I went off the Marine Corps and got into a unit called FAST Company, which is a Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Team. And what we were tasked with was going to places that were potentially going to be attacked. Kenya, Tanzania, those two embassies, when they were attacked, we showed up after the fact, which wasn't a good feeling because we knew we probably should have been there a month ahead of time. We did a bunch of stuff throughout the world. Naval, USS Cole, when it was bombed and it was in dry dock in the Middle East, we went there to bolster security around the ship while it was sitting there injured. So that was my first start at security. I got out of the Marine Corps, did some private security, worked for a bunch of large government entities. Lockheed Martin was one of them, and we would travel around and provide security for places that they were trying to do projects in. So that's where I cut my teeth. I got out of security contracting, got into law enforcement, and was an adjunct instructor. And I would travel all over the country and work for different people, teaching military, civilians, and private contractors, mainly firearms and tactics. And then one day, it was 2004, I'm in South Texas, and an all-girls school, administrator from an all-girls school came in and said, hey, we got this pamphlet from our sheriff's department. They said this is what we should be worried about for an active killer, but I don't feel like this is enough. And basically they just give them a couple checklists saying, hey, check off these things and you'll be good to go. They didn't provide them any training. By law, they don't have to provide them with any training. They just didn't have the manpower, they didn't have the ability to do it. So they came to us and they said, can you do something? And my boss said, hey, why don't you do something for them? So that's where I created the project. And it was out of necessity. These people just didn't have anything. So I thought, well, why don't we do the same thing we do when we show up at a shipyard or an embassy? Because when we're providing an armed response in a crisis, we want everybody around us to be able to respond appropriately as well. So the first thing that we would do when we'd show up on scene, besides set up an initial perimeter, was go in and talk to everybody that works there that lives there, that operates there day in and day out, and say, hey, this is what we expect from you when things go bad. Because you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. So my program has morphed since then. I've worked with a law firm that had 3 employees, and I've worked with production facilities that have 1,500 employees. I've worked with churches that have 15 people, and I've worked with churches with 2,500 people on the books, all right, and everything in between. Worked with a lot of schools. So with that, I bring a lot of experience to it. What you'll do is when you go out and you find somebody to consult, if you don't choose me, and that's fine, what I want you to do when you have your team, or you've already had your team, you're going to have somebody come in and do a little security audit, vet your instructor. Just because your instructor spent some time in the military or as a law enforcement officer does not mean they know what they're talking about. Does not mean that they have the experience or the credentials. I spend probably 30 days a year just training, going to after action reports. I've talked to people who were at Sutherland Springs, people who survived the Vegas shooting. That's the only way we learn how to respond to this stuff is by learning that stuff. So I travel around and I listen to these speakers and I hear what other instructors are doing, and the program continues to morph. So why do you need this training? Why is it so important? What's going to happen that you just can't pick up the phone and call 911 and have law enforcement show up and come and save the day? I want to talk to you about the stopwatch of death. It's a very grim term, and I didn't come up with it. Ron Borscht, who is the school resource officer guru for the United States. He just happens to be out of Bedford, Ohio, and I've known Ron for over a decade now, and he's forgotten more than I've ever learned. But he started off in the 80s compiling notes about active killer incidents. I say active killer versus active shooter because it could be somebody driving a vehicle into a group of people wanting to hurt them. It could be an arson, an explosive device, a knife, a baseball bat, whatever. If they're in a confined space trying to harm people, that is an active killer event. Okay, so it's not always somebody with a gun. So Ron came up with these averages. On the low end, we're looking at 1.9 people are dying every minute in an active killer incident. And most of his stats come from schools because we've got the most information and the most data has been collected there. Okay? When we look at churches are different because you could have a drug deal gone bad in the back parking lot and they may chalk that up as a church shooting. And that's not quite as accurate. Okay? So we use the school numbers. On the high end, we're looking at 7.9 to 8.2 Virginia Tech per minute. So if somebody kicks in that back door and they start shooting right now, who's going to pull their phone out and go, hold on a second, I call 911? It's not going to happen. It's not realistic. Self-preservation is going to kick in, and we are all just going to start to scatter. Some of us are going to fight, whatever. And then how far do we go before one of us calls 911? The studies have shown that we will go anywhere from 1 to 10 minutes before anybody calls. Traffic crashes. How many times have you driven past a traffic crash and go, oh my gosh, that looks terrible? But you never picked up your phone. You said, you know what? Somebody else there probably did. Everybody does that. Or somebody else will get it. I got to get to work. There's plenty of people there. Someone's going to do it. That's what everybody thinks. That's what prolongs this stuff. So let's say somebody kicks in the back door there and they start shooting. But let's say one of us is able to get out of the building and run to safety within 1 minute and call 911. 1 minute, okay? So now they're on the line with dispatch. Doesn't mean that law enforcement officers are able to leave right away. The average response time for the gathering of information and accurately dispatching where those law enforcement officers are supposed to go is about 1 minute. Because usually what we get on the other end of the line is, I don't know the address of my church, it's this church. And they're going, hold on, chill out, calm down. And all they're getting is pinging off of a cell phone tower, and they've got some sort of average idea. So it takes time to gather that information and then get the information out to law enforcement officers. So now we're at 2 minutes. And law enforcement officers aren't even en route. So now let's say after that minute response, that minute dispatch time, we get officers are coming to the scene. Let's just say for the sake of argument, it takes them 2 minutes, and that's a super fast response time. They just happen to be down the road, and they're able to negotiate through traffic and get here in 2 minutes. Just because they're here doesn't mean they're aggressing the bad guy. The bad guy has 4-minute head start on them because he's already in the building. He's already started killing. He's already inside. And when they're on scene, you know what they're doing? They're 100 yards from the driveway. They're saying, hey, I'm 41. That's what we do at my agency. 41 means you're on scene. You're calling it out early so that you can hang up the radio and open up your eyes and take in the scene and find out where you need to go. Where's my cover? Where's my concealment? Where are the doors? Where are my people at? Where do I need to go? They're not even in the building yet. But for the sake of argument, let's say they get on scene and they're able to get in the building and aggress the bad guy and get him in a corner, let's just say in 1 minute. So we got 5 minutes has elapsed. 5 minutes from the time it started. So that means 10 people died. So we got everybody here in the front row. We've got the second row, that's 7, 8, 9, and 10. I'm a Marine, I had to make sure I got my numbers right. All right? So we've got these people are our casualties. And that's with a 5-minute response time. Is that realistic for this area? It's realistic for the city I work in, but it's a smaller city and we got higher staffing. And we don't have, traffic around here is terrible. There's not a straight road around here, is there? Driving in, I couldn't find one. And they're all dark. So how fast can they drive? But you, each and every one of you, are the executive in charge of your personal detail, of your security detail. You're in charge of your security detail. You're in charge of yours. And it starts with situational awareness. As soon as somebody sees something bad, we have the ability to at least get the process going to save more lives, either by alerting other people or by going after the bad guy and just piling on what we call in the law enforcement community a polyester pig pile. Because we wear polyester and we all just jump on and people call us pigs, all right? That's what we do. We stop more fights that way than anything else. Everybody just jumps on and grabs an appendage. It happens in active killing instances all the time. The back two pews, if they're coming in through those doors, do you think they have a chance to run away? They're just getting shot in the back. How quickly can we empty out this building? How quickly can this side empty out there and this side empty out over here? It's not going to happen. So what's our option? Die or fight. That's your option in this room. That's what you got. So do you have a plan for that? Do you have training for that? What if he's just trying to get in? Somebody sees him walking through the parking lot with a rifle at port arms. He's walking in, looks angry. And someone yells out the alert. Do we have the ability to barricade? Do we know where we're going to go in this building to barricade? Do we have a fight plan in case he does get in? Who's going to call? What are they going to say? Are they going to have the information? Have we gone through this yet? Because the reality is, we're not going to rise to the occasion. We're going to default to our level of training. And what's your training like? How often is it? You know, my kids are 7 and 10. My 7-year-old still plays soccer, but he started out when he was 4 playing soccer. And they only practice 1 day a week for the game on Saturday. All right, now he practices 2 times a week for the game on Saturday. Just basic dribbling, passing, communication, understanding the game. And he's practiced, I got over 100 practices now, and he's getting better each time because he keeps revisiting it. How often have you practiced to evacuate your sanctuary or your prayer rooms? Under chaos, not the controlled like we do when we do a fire drill. How often do we practice that? Most people never practice it. That's what we provide. That's what training looks like when you come to us. Is we come in, we walk around your church and we say, okay, I see this, this, and this are problems. Most of the time, they're really small problems. They're easy fixes. It's a church that Forrest was talking about that has high-tech doors. But if they turned off this action, you couldn't get out unless you hit this special bar to get out. So it slowed people's ability to get out of the building in a hurry. So we changed that right away. Say, hey, we got to do something about that. A lot of people, where do they come when they come in the church? They come to the sanctuary. They may know one other room, but they don't know the nooks and crannies. If you go to this church, do you know what's behind here? Do you know where these doors actually lead to? Do you know if you go down this one hall and to the right, where the next exit is? Most people don't. So we walk through with everybody. We do a walkthrough, and we take a look at each door. If you end up in this office or in this room, how do you barricade the door? Do you have any improvised weapons in there? Can you fight back if you had to? Do you have that option? So what training looks like, we walk in, we come in through, we identify the problems that you have, then we formulate a plan, and we put together usually a 3-hour training block. I like 4, but most of the time it's hard enough just to get you in here for 3. We give you a lecture on different things, the threats, the things that have happened before, and what's the most common thing. And the most common thing I'll tell you right now is 98% of the time, it's one shooter with 2 guns and minimal planning. Across the board, schools, churches, businesses, that's what they're dealing with. So now we know what the threat is. We know better to prepare for it, and we're not overwhelmed by this threat. We know we have options. And we talk about run, hide, fight. 3 very easy options that you can choose from. And then how we implement those. And that you don't need permission to fight for your life or someone else's life. How do we barricade doors? How would you break a window? It sounds simple enough, but I tell you what, in 16 years of law enforcement, I've seen more than one police officer take a PR-24 and bounce it off a glass because it hit right in the center. And you know what? Glass flexes. Next time you walk past one of these doors, put your hand right in the middle. I'm sure whoever cleans the windows is going to appreciate it. Push in on it, and you'll see it flex a little bit. So we teach people, what are you going to hit it with? Where are you going to hit it? You got to hit it in the corner where it's the most rigid. And can you rake it out? And how do you pass people out? Are you willing to toss little Jimmy out of a second-story window to save his life? Because the body won't go where the mind hasn't been. You have to put yourself there and say, if this is going to happen, can I do it? Oh, it's going to be terrible. But yes, it's for the greater good. Little Jimmy doesn't want to go out. I'm going to chuck him out the window. Because I know Bob and Jim are down there, and they're going to pick him up. And if he's hurt, they're going to carry him to safety. It's better than him getting a bullet hole. Right? But the body won't go where the mind hasn't been, so we have to explore that. So we talk about barricading. How do you barricade a door? Just putting your body in front of the door isn't enough. Just putting a couple of chairs there isn't enough. There's actually a system to it. It's really easy, but if you've never done it, it makes it difficult. The worst place to learn how to do something is in a crisis. Right? The last place I ever want to learn how to use a newfangled self-defense move or tool on my tool belt at work is in a fight. So what do? We spend hours and weeks doing tons and tons of reps operating a taser. That's where I was all day today. 8-hour taser class. I've been carrying a taser for 9 years now. I've been an instructor for 7 years, and it was just an instructor refresher, and it was nothing but the basics. But that's what we go over. I don't take it and just push it off and say, well, I've done this a while. We've got to keep revisiting it. And we've got to get 80% of the congregation trained up in this. Because the rest, the 20% who don't want to come, don't want to train, don't believe in it, they're just the sheep. But they'll follow the rest, right? You are the sheepdogs. You can be a sheepdog. You don't have to be carrying a gun to be the sheepdog. Your head can be on a swivel. And you can look around when you see something that's not right, you can question it. You see that guy who looks troubled or that woman that looks troubled when she comes in the church. Who's to say you can't go up and say, hey, what's going on? How you doing? Welcome to the church. And just talk to him and bridge that gap. You may stop an attack right there. You may have already closed the distance so nobody else has to get shot in the back. You are right there, and you will have the first hands on that person and start yelling and screaming at the top of your lungs to alert everybody when they decide to initiate the attack. That's happened on numerous occasions. Numerous occasions. You know why you don't hear about them? Because they're not sensational enough. Not enough people died. That's why. Google tonight, church attack, and bring up the news column on the Google, and you will come up and you'll see knife attack, assault, domestic violence issue, this, that, and the other. Somebody doesn't always die, but why don't they die? It's probably because somebody got involved. And these people are cowards. You look at it time and time again. If they wanted a gunfight, they would come to the police department. They want the easy target. They're looking at you as the easy target. That's what they want. And that's what we want to change with training. We want your head on a swivel. We want your ushers, all right, to be smiling and greeting people and be observant. That's overt security right off the bat. They don't even need to be carrying a gun. They don't need to be overtly carrying a gun. It could be concealed, right? Because with our training, it's always ministry first. We don't change the church to adapt to security. We adapt security around the church. And we can make it as low-key as you want. We can make it as overt as you want. But here in the United States, we don't need a huge overt security. We don't need guard towers and fences and dogs and uniformed people. It's not there yet. And I don't think it'll be there if we can nip it in the bud. That's what we do with training. That's what training looks like from us. We train the masses. After that, or even before that, sometimes people don't go with training the masses, which I think is a mistake, right? We train the armed element. And it's typically a 3-day course, and not everybody passes just because you show up and you paid the money for it. One of the things that I do is the FASTER program in the state of Ohio, and I'm one of 3 instructors in the state that trains and certifies teachers and faculty members in schools to be armed. And I tell you what, that's probably the biggest notch on my belt in my life, but I feel like I am doing more with that than I ever will. And we've already saved lives. We've already had teachers deal with armed threats in the state of Ohio. You don't hear about it, though. I think we're up to 72 counties in the state that have armed teachers. Most people don't even realize it because it's covert. They may put one sign up. They may send a newsletter out saying, hey, this is what we've done. And it's so far, it's a success. We haven't had any issues. But that's what we do. We take that same curriculum and we adapt it for your church. We come into your church. We train in your facility with you. When you read my pamphlet, you'll hear about phase 3. Phase 3 is probably, I think, the most beneficial because you're going to have naysayers in your church. They're going to say, I don't want armed. I don't want this. I don't want this. It's not going to work. After we've got everybody trained up, we do training scenarios once a year. We just come down, we do a handful of scenarios where we actually fire blanks in your building. We do that with training the masses on phase 1. Because have you ever heard a gunshot in your church? I hope not. And if you had and you're here, you're one leg up. You've experienced something. You survived it. And that's on-the-job training. We don't want that. We want you to first experience it in a controlled environment. Because when you're down the hall and to the right and 3 rooms down, you hear something, you're going to go, what was that? It sounded like a hammer. It sounded like somebody dropping a box or something. You dismiss it. You may not even hear it at all. This is a huge church. You wouldn't hear it. You'd be surprised. We fire 30-06 blanks sometimes in some of the bigger facilities. And you can be on one end of the building and never hear it. Never hear it. We're talking about a high-velocity round. You never hear it. Most of the time, we just use 22 blanks. Most people don't hear it. But when you hear it, now you've got a clue of what is that noise? And then how do I react? Do I get out? Do I shelter in place? Do I prepare for the fight? That's what training will look like. And then after it's all done and we get everybody trained up and together, we come back once a year, twice a year, whatever you'd like. And then we run training. The armed element, not with live firearms because it's training. We give them blue guns so that everybody can see how everybody else is going to react, so they can see what it's going to... It's like a scrimmage before the big game. And then we can take a look at those fundamental flaws and we can fix them. We can adapt training. We can adapt the policy. We can change it to fit your needs. That's what training should be. If you don't pick me and you pick somebody else, that's what training should look like. It should be very fundamentally based and all about the basics. And you should master those basics because that's all it is. There's no advanced training when it comes to this stuff. There's only advanced application of the fundamentals. That's what we do.
All right, well, I think we're going to go ahead and close, and if you guys have the opportunity to stay and ask questions, then please do that, but I'm going to close us in prayer. I do want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming and speaking to us. This is one of those conversations that's a hard conversation to have, but the world in which we live in means we have to have it, but also not to walk through life being frightened. Satan wins when we live that way. We know where we are going, and there are some things that we cannot plan for, but the things that we can plan for, God asks us to do that. So let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we are grateful people because you live with us. You live in us, you live upon us, and you have given us the desire, Lord, to be people of protection, to be people of peace, and yet peace doesn't always mean do nothing. And so, Lord, I pray that as we gather in this place together, as you speak to individuals, that you would help them start to form a plan, that you would be their wisdom, that you would be the one to help them take a step forward. And Lord, I know that the people in this room have different stories, different circumstances, different churches, and so it is not a one-size-fits-all. So would you help them to have the discernment that they need, Lord, in order to go about the business that you have called them to? Because, Lord, before and above everything, what we want to do is ministry that glorifies you, and that can include ministry of security as well. So we thank you. We pray, Lord, that each and every person leaves this place and gets home safely and feels blessed by the gathering tonight. And it's in your name, Jesus, that we pray. Amen.
Amen.